what your impression is of a simple attack. If you're thinking about something that's simple, what does it mean to you? Okay? Direct. Direct is one form of simple offense, isn't it? It's a very important form. Is there any other way to do simple offense?
One fencing tempo.
All right, good definition, but what's a tempo?
Lunge distance or less.
It's what?
Lunge distance or less.
All right, a tempo has as an influence distance. So lunge distance or less. We're going to talk about that in a minute. That's correct, but it may not be broad enough. Okay? What else? Let's go back to the thing about tempo. What's a tempo?
Time.
Time. What about time?
Fencing time. One action.
All right, is fencing time the same as linear time?
No.
All right, so what's the difference?
Fraction of a time.
It's a fraction.
Time that it takes for one fencing action.
Okay, it's relative. It's relative to the length of time, linear time, that's necessary to complete one fencing action. We talk about simple attack, we assume that it's offensive, don't we? All right, do tempos also relate to defense, or are they only offensive? They're only offensive. All right, so if you're talking about what a tempo is, it's the amount of time necessary, okay, to execute one simple offensive fencing movement. Go over that again. It's the amount of time necessary to execute one, underline one, simple, underline, box, star, whatever, simple, offensive fencing action. Now, the two key words there are one and simple. One is obvious, all right? But one what? One intention, one movement, one direct action, one indirect action. That just begins to be subject to interpretation, doesn't it? All right? Even more subject to interpretation of what one means as we get down to that idea of simple. Because, as was pointed out, okay, what Kathy said was that it's relative to extension distance, advance distance, or lunge distance or less. But is that true in the modern convention of fencing? Tell me if I'm making a simple attack.
Yes.
Okay? That means it's one tempo. But in terms of theoretical units, did I only have one unit? I didn't, did I? All right. So what we have here is we have a theoretical structure which was developed when fencing began. We have a modern interpretation which incorporates the sliding together of some of these original theoretical building blocks. All right? And this is where we get in problems when we go to different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and officials begin calling things in ways that we may not be familiar with. We have to understand the reasoning and the background behind this. So if we want to make effective simple offense, we must understand all of the parameters that relate to it. One of those parameters is distance. All right? It's always right if it's at extension distance, if it's at advance distance, and if it's at lunge distance. There's not a director in the world, there's not an official in the world, there's not a coach in the world who won't agree that that's simple. All right? The modern convention also includes something which loosely is referred to as long or grand distance, which means the addition of one preparatory unit. Whether that unit is an advance, whether it's a jump, whatever it happens to be, that also means that if that is executed with the simple movement of blade work, that I'm making what? A simple attack. There's no room for a counterattack to intercede into that motion. The modern convention also includes something which loosely is referred to as long or grand distance, which means the addition of one preparatory unit. Whether that unit is an advance, whether it's a jump, whatever it happens to be, that also means that if that is executed with the simple movement of blade work, that I'm making what? A simple attack. There's no room for a counterattack to intercede into that motion. There's no room for a counterattack to intercede into that motion. All right, so we have a little better idea now of what simple is, right? And what a tempo is. All right? A tempo, remember, is a unit of time. It's a theoretical unit of time. It's a theoretical construct. It's not linear. Okay? Linear time has seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, centuries, decades, or whatever. Right? Lots of units. And they're all the same. They always have been the same. Every tempo that's done in fencing is what? It's different. It's like a fingerprint. It's unique. Okay? Every one is a little different. Now, we know that distance influences the tempo. We know, obviously, that the extension of the weapon arm also influences the tempo. As an example, if I just advance toward my opponent without any extension or any delivery eventually of the weapon, am I making an offensive tempo? No. I'm making a preparation. As an example, if I just advance toward my opponent without any extension or any delivery eventually of the weapon, am I making an offensive tempo? No. I'm making a preparation. And there's a difference. All right? If a tempo is involved in the delivery of the weapon, now my opponent is obliged to do something. Okay? Now, if they're smart, they'll pair, or they'll run. All right? If they're not so smart, or if they like to gamble, they may what? They may counterattack. Now, if I know and I can predict what my opponent's responses are, now this gives me a tremendous advantage. If I know that if I make an advanced lunge, simple attack, and every time I do that, my opponent counterattacks, what should I do?
Keep doing it.
I should do it all day long and all night long, and I should win every bout, shouldn't I? All right? It's a gift. All right? Now, on the other hand, if the instant that I move forward and get into preparation, if the opponent stays very calm, very relaxed, I start my attack, at the very last moment my opponent makes parry riposte, I have to deal with that a little differently in terms of how I construct the timing and the nature of my attack. I'm not going to put my weapon arm way out in front of me and start my attack. Why?
Because it'll take it.
Because it's giving you information. It's saying, you know, here's my attack, it's coming, please have it for lunch, and return it to me after you're finished. Okay? So instead, if that fence repair is very late, I get as close to them as I possibly can before I make my final delivery, before I deliver my final stroke. Because I want to make sure that I gain full advantage. Now, remembering that all the time that my weapon arm is back, that I'm also gambling with something else.
Yeah. The director may rule it as in a preparation and not an attack.
That's exactly right. And the director, depending on when the counterattack comes out or the parry begins, may see different things than what we intend. So we have to learn under what circumstances each of these actions is appropriate. It's not that they're questionably right or wrong, it's whether they're appropriate for the official, for the opponent, and for any other situation. Some days, you just simply don't have the same timing that you might have on other days. So you might have to also take that in consideration. All right, let's look at it a different way. If we look at distances, there's two historical ways of approaching it. One of them is to classify each individual distance. The first distance is what you can hit with an extension. That's generally called either extension or riposte distance. Okay? The second distance is what you can reach with a simple movement of footwork that's not a lunge. So generally the movement of footwork you would use is what? An advance. It could be a jump, it could be a variety of things, but it's a shorter motion than a lunge. All right? The third distance, the classical movement for attack and fencing, is the lunge itself. All right? So far we have three delineations: extension, advance, lunge. All right? The fourth delineation is what is added to by one additional movement. If I make an advance before I start the lunge, a jump before I start the lunge, something of one unit of preparation before I actually make the lunge. All right? Grand distance is a way of looking at that. It's an additional unit. All right? Now, some organizations of fencing theory only look at three distances rather than four. And their distances are short, medium, or middle, and long. Now, what's included in each one? Short distance is only what? The extension or the riposte. Middle distance is either the advance or the lunge, because it's what's delivered with one unit. All right? And long distance is the distance in which you have to have a preparation prior to the delivery. Now, I prefer this last definition because it clearly separates out the difference in the traditional movements, which are from short or middle distance, and the, if you want to call it, newer or more modern concept of the longer distance. Now, when we say newer or modern, we're not talking about the last 2 or 3 years. We're talking about the last 15 or 20 years. All right? So, this is not something that's brand new. It's something, though, that still in certain parts of our country has not filtered down. We know that a simple attack has one intention, one unit of fencing time, right? Okay? One tempo, if it's going to be a simple attack. All right. What other parameters are there related to this that we need to deal with? How can we classify simple attacks? Somebody mentioned one earlier. Direct. All right? Direct offense is always considered simple. I mean, you've never seen anyone make a straight thrust attack in their life and have it called anything other than a simple attack. Right? All right. So that's obvious. Everyone knows that's the case. All right? But what about indirect simple attacks? What about indirect actions? What makes an action indirect and what makes an action a preparation? This is the fine line. Again, we have a decision point here, both for the fencer and for the director. All right? So what makes an indirect attack indirect?
You go to a different...
Okay, over, under, around, or through the blade. It's a good way to look at it. Any other? Okay, disengage. A change of lines. And only once. All right? So now the issue is, if you're going to make an indirect action, is it caused by the response of the opponent? Or is it caused by the position of your blade that must in some way take a different path to the target? And the answer is, it could be either. If the opponent is preparing against your blade, then it can be as a response. You can still be doing a simple attack. If the opponent's blade is stationary and you're in a closed line, then your indirect attack is necessary to get out of the closed line and into the open target. All right? All right. Go back over it again. If the attacker, the intended attacker, is faced with a situation that the opponent is attempting a blade preparation. Good example. You're engaged, the person makes a change of engagement. When they make the change of engagement, you make a counter disengage, right? You made a simple attack by counter disengage. But it was in response to her change of engagement. You didn't start the action. She started the action. Okay? She didn't start it offensively. It may have been intended offensively, but it was a preparation. It wasn't a real attack. And I attacked on that preparation. All right? Now, that's used to be the least common form of simple attack. Before, it was always that the attack was generated by the fencer from a clothesline on their own. If you look at modern fencing today, you'll see that more and more attacks are responsive. More and more simple attacks are truly attacks on preparation, as opposed to being the purest form of direct or indirect offense. Because the opportunity is there because of the opponent's change of the distance or effort to go for your blade. So we have a big difference here in the way we approach simple attacks tactically. All right? You understand what we're after now? Sort of? Okay. So we have the nature of the simple attack. We now have a classification, direct or indirect. Okay? Now, another way to look at this is direct is always from an open line. There's always available target. All right? Can you have an indirect attack from an open line?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Let's talk about some of them. Very good. Changing elevation, changing angulation. Okay? There are methods of making indirect actions, okay, from an open line. All right? Now, I've been fencing 30, how old am I? 31 years, almost 32. When I first started fencing, if I came down the strip and I did this, all right, this motion right here was always considered to be an invitation to preparation, and I was going to get nailed if the opponent started anywhere near before the time that I finished. Okay, today if I'm making an advanced lunge and I did that exact same movement, guess what? I'm the attacker. Even though my arm is doing what?
Bending.
It's bending. All right? So if you want to call it the critical focus on the extended arm or the bending arm is beginning to soften. Okay? The motion of intention is becoming more important than the specific action or movement of the arm.
Where you're threatening.
And where you're threatening, or where you're intending to threaten. Now, some of you watch some fencers, either current or from a couple years ago. There was a fencer who fenced in New York named Josh Huttenbeck. Okay? Josh is a very good 12 fencer, loves thrown point, takes a lot of beats and angular hits and things of this nature. If you ever see Josh go straight, it's a very rare occasion. All right? But one of the key focuses of his game was always this motion of the arm, coupled with multiple footwork motions. All right? Why is he considered an attacker if he's doing all this mess? And the reason is his intention is always singular. And the reason is his intention is always singular. And the director and the spectators and the opponent perceive it as singular. So guess what? It is singular. All right? Now, if I am making an action and attempting to provoke a response with additional distance, now this provoking the response converts from being singular to being preparation. Now I have a loophole. Now the opponent has an opportunity. But if I don't give that opportunity, if the entire stroke is singular, now I am making an indirect movement. And this is the current convention. So when we start working with this, when we start physically doing this, these are some of the things we're going to be experimenting with and playing with. What makes it preparation? What makes it a simple attack? Okay, and again, the focus is always on distance and intention. Okay, I'll do it from the side. Now you tell me whether I did a simple attack or whether I did a preparation and then a simple attack. Okay? Okay, now I'm going to do it a little differently. In the second, it was very clear that I did what? That I am I'm inviting, I am looking, I'm provoking, I'm doing something separate from the delivery of my attack. But in the first example, was I looking for anything?
No.
The more recent, more modern convention is not so much on the movement of the arm, but on the intention of the movement of the arm. Okay? Am I delivering a stroke, or am I preparing?
If there's any form of hesitation,
That's right.
then that's what you're talking about.
Okay. If there's any form of hesitation, it may negate the attack, but it may not, depending on when the response of the opponent is there. That's one of the key issues. You can make the worst attack in the world. I mean, it can be, like this, and it can still be an attack if the opponent goes and watches it hit. Okay? Or when you get right next to him, goes, oh, and counterattacks. Keep in mind that it's the response, it's the obligation of the opponent to find the loophole in your attack. If they choose to counterattack, okay, or to become counter-offensive in nature, they must find the opportunity. If they don't find the opportunity, you're still the attacker. That burden is on them, not on you. In the old convention of lunge distance, okay, any real conceivable possibility they could hit me when my arm's going back? Impossible, right? Unless they start first, in which case I'm not the attacker to begin with, right? But now we add the long distance. This is where that confusion comes in. Now, I'll give you the example. There's lots of, if you want to call them unwritten rules of priority. We're going to take probably the key one based on the counterattack, which says that in order for the counterattack to earn priority, it must hit prior to the beginning of the final tempo of the attack. Now keep in mind what it said, final tempo of the attack. which says that in order for the counterattack to earn priority, it must hit prior to the beginning of the final tempo of the attack. Now keep in mind what it said, final tempo of the attack. Okay? So, if you consider this to be one tempo, is there any way? All right? If you're looking at individual actions of the attack, and on the step I'm here, and that attack hits me, maybe. It's a possibility. But it better get there pretty clearly before I'm finishing that advance and getting ready to start the launch. Pretty clearly. Because again, it's the obligation of the counterattacker to make such a convincing action that the director feels that it takes over what the attacker intended. Now later today, we're going to get into discussions of timing of the weapon arm to the foot, relative also to this distance. And we're going to see there's a tremendous variability of what is allowable. But here again, allowable to whom? To the director, to the official, to the convention. And this is what we have to take into consideration when we start training our fencers to do simple offense. If we know the directors in our area, or in the area that which we're going to compete, only allow simple actions to be executed up to the lunge or less, should we train our fencer in this circumstance, or should we encourage them to make simple attacks with an advanced lunge? Okay? What's the answer?
No.
Probably not, because they're going to get real frustrated. They're going to know they're right based on what they've been taught, but they're not going to get rewarded for that. Therefore, in fact, they're going to get penalized. It causes them problems. They try harder, faster, whatever, and it doesn't work. On the other hand, let's say I'm fencing in an environment I'm not familiar with, and virtually any forward motion that's made is considered to be an attack. All right? And as long as it's up to that unit of preparation plus the unit of the delivery, depending on what the blade's doing, and I'm used to only seeing that one unit coming at me, and I think that if I extend into that first unit of movement, it's going to be mine, and the director says the attack, the counterattack, the attack, the counterattack. My fencer also has to understand that there is a lot of variability and a lot of room within all this structure.